In folk songs and legends, Ireland is often called the most beautiful of women. This comparison arose not only because of the beauty of Ireland's landscapes, but also due to the constant attempts by foreigners to conquer the island. For over 1,000 years, the Irish had to fight for independence, defending their island from numerous invaders. Such was the history of Ireland even during the time of the Celtic kingdoms, and it would continue long after the English conquest of Ireland. The Celts, who settled in Ireland partially separated from the rest, forming the Gaels or Goidelic culture. Among the Gaels, their own proto-alphabet was widespread, known as Ogham. Even so, aside from minor differences, the Gaels lived like other Celts on the British Isles, organized into tribes led by chieftains and druids. The following year, in 1316, Edward declared himself High King of Ireland and once again defeated the English at the Battle of Skerries. From then on, Edward's strategy largely consisted of raiding expeditions deeper into the island. Soon, due to war, looting, and drought, famine broke out in Ireland. The Irish began to blame the Scots, and as a result, many abandoned Edward Bruce's army. Exhausted by the prolonged war, the Scots could no longer withstand the English, who continued to receive reinforcements from England. By 1318, the English launched an effort to drive Edward out of Ireland. The armies met at the Battle of Fard, where the English defeated the Scots and Edward was killed in the fighting. It seemed that after the failure of this campaign, no one would be able to drive the English out of Ireland. But in the mid-14th century, the bubonic plague, known as the Black Death, swept across Europe. It reached Ireland in 1348. The different lifestyles of the English and the Irish played a key role during the epidemic. The English lived mainly in towns and cities, while the Irish lived in rural villages. Since the plague struck hardest in urban areas, most of the English population in Ireland was wiped out. English settlements were left nearly deserted, and those English who survived the plague often fled the island. By 1360, the English in Ireland were living only in the area around Dublin, where their territory was known as the English Pale, even though on paper they still claimed all of Ireland as their domain. Since most of the English population in Ireland had vanished, Irish culture began to flourish once again. This cultural resurgence became known in history as the Gaelic Revival. The English responded with strict prohibitions. In 1367, they issued the Statute of Kilkenny, a set of laws that forbade the English in Ireland from adopting the Irish language, traditions, or customs. In 1394, King Richard II of England decided to reconquer Ireland. His first campaign met with some success. He managed to capture a number of Irish territories in the south and east of the island. These lands were granted to his loyal lords, with the Fitzgerald family, who had been in Ireland since Strongbow's invasion in 1170, receiving the largest share. Richard II's second campaign in Ireland was far less successful. Due to the fact that the English throne was seized by Henry Bolingbroke, Richard was forced to hastily return to England. Throughout the 15th century, the English once again had little focus on Ireland. First, they were drawn into the renewed conflict of the 100 Years' War, and later, England was engulfed in the Wars of the Roses. During this civil war, the English lords in Ireland mostly supported the House of York. When the Tudors seized the throne, Ireland became a launch pad for uprisings, most notably the rebellion of Lambert Simnel in 1487 and that of Perkin Warbeck in 1492. In the end, Ireland in the early 16th century differed little from ancient times. In 1516, English officials described it as follows: "Over 60 counties are under the control of enemies of the crown. There rule more than 60 chieftains who call themselves kings, live by war, and obey no one. There are also 30 English lords in Ireland who follow the same Irish ways. Each of them makes war or peace without asking the king's permission." In reality, Ireland had existed in this fragmented state for centuries, and the 16th century brought no real change to the island. But this time it was England that had changed. It had become a centralized state, with the king wielding nearly absolute power. The new king, Henry VIII, intended to extend that same authority over Ireland. At this point, it's worth mentioning the Fitzgerald family. Gerald Fitzgerald, the Earl of Kildare, like many others, fought both against Irish clans and against rival English lords, all while largely ignoring orders from London. Because of this, he was twice summoned to the English capital and imprisoned in the Tower of London. The first time, in 1526, he spent 4 years there. But after being summoned again in 1534, Gerald never returned. He was imprisoned once more, this time for killing Irishmen loyal to the English crown, and died in the Tower. While Gerald Fitzgerald was imprisoned in the Tower, the Earldom of Kildare was governed by his eldest son, Thomas, better known as Silken Thomas. When rumors reached him that his father had been executed, Thomas raised an army and declared himself King of Ireland, openly defying the English monarch. His forces quickly seized most of the English-held territories in Ireland. Nevertheless, he failed to capture Dublin. In 1535, he suffered a defeat outside the city walls. Soon after, English troops under Leonard Grey arrived in Ireland and recaptured the Kildare lands. Fitzgerald continued to fight against the royal troops, but suffered several defeats. He had hoped to gain support from the Irish clans, but they did not ally with Thomas. Eventually, at the end of 1535, Fitzgerald surrendered to the royal forces and met the same fate as his father. He was sent to London and executed the following year. The English troops never left Ireland. They marched across the island, forcing Irish rulers to swear allegiance to Henry VIII. To consolidate their power over the island, the English confiscated lands from Irish clans and returned them as private property to Irish kings, who now became ordinary landlords. Thus, the O'Neills became Earls of Tyrone, the O'Briens, Earls of Thomond, and the MacBurks, who were originally of English descent but had assimilated, became Earls of Clanricarde. This land policy became known as surrender and re-grant, and in 1542, Henry VIII crowned himself King of Ireland, thereby formally securing the English crown's authority over the island. Thus, by the end of the Middle Ages, Ireland, after centuries of fragmentation, had come entirely under English control, or so the English thought. In reality, a new chapter of prolonged struggle was about to begin as the Irish continued to rise up in rebellion against the conquerors, relentlessly fighting for their